My perfect sisters treated me like their personal servant for 17 years. At tomorrow's family dinner, my mom casually said, "Just watch the kids while the rest of us celebrate." Like always, they expected me to stay in the background while they enjoyed everything. But this time, things are going to be different. What they don't know is that this dinner will be their last celebration the way they're used to. The dust in the attic felt like a heavy shroud over the secrets of my childhood, thick enough to choke the breath from my lungs. I found it wedged between a crate of tangled Christmas lights and a pile of moth-eaten sweaters, a leather-bound photo album that looked far too pristine for this forgotten corner. The cover was smooth, devoid of the grime coating everything else, which meant someone had been up here recently, touching it, shielding it from the decay of the rest of the house. My name is Maddie, and looking back, I realized that some boxes are better left taped shut and some memories are better left buried. The first page didn't just hurt, it hit with the force of a physical blow, a sudden realization that the girl I thought I was didn't actually exist in the eyes of the people who raised me. There was Lindsay, my oldest sister, captured in a series of glossy 4x6 prints from her high school graduation. She was the perfect daughter, the valedictorian with the perfect smile, her golden future laid out in my mother's meticulous handwriting beneath every photograph. Every achievement, every minor trophy, every staged grin was documented with a level of devotion that bordered on religious. I felt a shadow fall over the page and slammed the album shut, watching dust particles dance frantically in a single beam of afternoon sunlight. Grandma Edith stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette sharp and imposing despite her years, her eyes tracking the movement of my trembling hands. I tried to slide the book back into its hiding place, offering a weak excuse about just looking through some old photos, but Grandma's voice cut through the silence with a sharp hint of vinegar she reserved for my mother's choices. She called it Margaret's shrine to success, a bitter acknowledgement of the hierarchy my mother had built within these walls. She told me to go ahead and look, claiming that the truth might hurt, but it could never sting as much as the lie I had been living. I reopened the heavy cover, flipping through page after page of triumphs that weren't mine. I saw Alyssa's first art show, Lindsay's lavish wedding, their college degrees, their pregnancies, and the birth of their children, all cataloged with breathtaking precision. When Grandma asked if I noticed anything missing, the word came out smaller than I intended, a whispered confirmation of the void I was staring at. 17 years of my life were simply gone. There were no photos of my dance recitals, no preserved honor roll certificates, and not a single trace of the school play from last spring where, as Grandma put it, I had stolen the entire show. My throat tightened until it was hard to swallow, and I desperately hoped there was another album, a secret one just for me, but the look on Grandma's face told me the search was over. She lowered herself onto a dusty trunk, explaining that she had discovered this collection only a week ago while helping my mother clean. My mother had been so proud to show it off, so blinded by the brilliance of her older daughters that she didn't even realize she was showing her own mother a record of my erasure. My fingers traced the edge of a photo of Lindsay winning a marketing award, a reminder that the entire family would be gathering tomorrow for a dinner to celebrate Alyssa's latest pregnancy milestone. I knew the script by heart. I would be expected to mind Lindsay's energetic twins while the adults drank expensive wine and reminisced about the very photos I was currently holding. Grandma's laugh was a sharp, sudden sound in the quiet attic as she pointed out the difference between being a helpful sister and being a doormat. She told me that while my sisters had learned how to be the stars of the show, it was high time I learned the power of the word no. The fear of my mother's reaction sat like a stone in my stomach, but the images of my own invisibility were burned into my retinas. I quietly confessed to Grandma that I had been accepted into a prestigious art school in New York on a full scholarship, a secret I hadn't dared to breathe to anyone else. Her eyes lit up with a genuine fire, telling me that this was the kind of news that actually deserved a place in a family history. My mother's plan for me was far more practical and far less ambitious. A local state school where I could stay close to home, remain useful, and take an internship at Lindsay's firm that they had already arranged without bothering to ask me. The question of what I actually wanted hung in the stagnant attic air, demanding an answer I was finally ready to give. From the kitchen below, I could hear the familiar sounds of my mother planning the menu, already delegating the chores and counting on me to be the invisible glue that kept their perfect evening from falling apart. I wanted my own page. I wanted to be more than a footnote in someone else's success story. Grandma smiled a slow, knowing smile and suggested I start taking pictures that were actually worth saving. As I tucked the album back into the dark, I felt a shift in the very foundation of who I was. Tomorrow, they would arrive expecting the same reliable, quiet Maddie who functioned like gravity, constant and unnoticed. They had no idea that the girl they knew had been left behind in the attic. When I helped Grandma down the stairs, the house already felt different, less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where I had been playing a supporting role for far too long. The family dinner began exactly as I anticipated. Lindsay walked through the door and immediately dumped her 4-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, into my lap without so much as a greeting. She glided toward the kitchen, her designer purse swinging, calling out for me to watch them while she helped Mom with the roast. I caught Grandma's eye from across the room. She raised a single eyebrow in a silent challenge. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood up, gently moved the twins aside, and announced that I couldn't help because I needed to finish my art portfolio for my college applications. The silence that followed was thick with confusion. Lindsay froze, demanding to know when I had decided to apply to art school, her voice dripping with the patronizing tone she usually reserved for her toddlers. She reminded me of the internship she had secured for me, acting as if I were being ungrateful for a future I never asked for. When she asked what had gotten into me, I simply told her nothing had changed. I just had work to do. Her immediate reaction was to call for our mother, the standard procedure for dealing with the youngest child when she stopped following the rules. Mom appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron and sounding weary as she told me that my portfolio could wait. When I asked if it should wait the same way my dance recitals and art shows had waited for my sister's milestones, the air left the room. I challenged her to show me the pictures she took of my life, the ones she kept in the fancy album in the attic. Her face flushed a deep, guilty red while Lindsay looked on, genuinely baffled by the sudden rebellion. I looked my mother in the eye and told her I knew I wasn't in that book, not once. Lindsay tried to scoff it off as me being dramatic, but she couldn't answer when I asked her what role I had played in the spring musical or what my last dance recital was even about. Grandma Edith intervened, suggesting we all sit down for a real conversation, but Mom was already in defensive mode, snapping that I was just being sensitive and that dinner was the priority. It was Alyssa who wandered in next, hand on her belly, asking what the fuss was about. Lindsay told her I was having a tantrum, but I corrected her. I was having a revelation. I pulled out my phone and read my acceptance letter aloud, the words full scholarship and New York ringing through the house like a bell. My mother's voice was a whisper, mourning the loss of her plan, while Lindsay remained convinced that I was being irresponsible. I told them both that I needed to be seen for who I was, not for how useful I could be to them. As I headed upstairs to finish my work, leaving them in a stunned, argumentative heap, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. I wasn't downstairs making peace, I was upstairs making a choice. A few days later, the tension in the house had become unbearable. My mother was using silence as a weapon, and Lindsay was peppering my phone with passive-aggressive texts about family loyalty. I sought refuge at Grandma Edith's house, where the scent of lavender and old books offered a temporary shield. She told me my mother had called twice, hoping Grandma would talk some sense into me regarding the money for my education. I was confused until Grandma revealed the secret college fund she had been building for me since the day I was born. My sisters had their futures paid for by my parents, but Grandma had seen the way the wind was blowing and made sure I would never be beholden to their demands. As I stared at the bank statement, my eyes watered at the sheer scale of her kindness. This was the real reason Lindsay was so desperate to control me. She thought they held the financial leash that would pull me back from New York. A knock at the door signaled Lindsay's arrival, her Mercedes idling in the driveway like a predator. She burst in, accusing me of using Grandma and being inappropriate. Grandma shut her down with a voice that could have frozen hell, ordering her to sit. Lindsay sat, her nervous energy radiating off her as she listed the casualties of my rebellion. Mom was devastated, Dad was hiding in his workshop, and Alyssa's blood pressure was rising. When she tried to guilt-trip me about Alyssa's pregnancy, I refused to take the bait. I pointed out that she had promised my labor to Alyssa without ever consulting me. She claimed they had supported me plenty, but when I challenged her to name a single time they had truly shown up for me, the silence stretched out, long and empty. Grandma quietly sipped her tea, waiting to see if my sister had anything left to say. "This isn't about support," Lindsay finally said, her voice strained and sharp. "This is about you being selfish, running off to New York and abandoning your family just like you abandoned your own dreams." The words shot out of me before I could stop them, raw and unfiltered. Lindsay went pale, her composure fracturing. "You wanted to be a writer, remember? You used to tell me stories when I was little, but Mom and Dad thought marketing was more practical, so you gave up. Now you are successful and miserable, and you cannot stand that I am choosing differently." "You don't know anything about my life," she whispered. "I know you cry in your car sometimes after these family dinners," I retorted. "I know you hate your job, but keep pushing for promotions, and I know you want me to follow your path because it would validate the choices you regret." Tears spilled down Lindsay's cheeks, ruining her mascara. She argued that she was only trying to protect me from the harsh reality of the world, from the people who never make it as artists, but I met her gaze with a steady resolve. I told her I would rather fail on my own terms than spend my life living someone else's version of success. The fight drained out of her, and she slumped back, suddenly looking smaller, more like the sister who used to read me bedtime stories. "I just wanted," she whispered, before trailing off. "To help?" Grandma interjected quietly. "Or to control?" Lindsay wiped her eyes, leaving black smudges on her fingers. She warned me that Mom was going to cut me off, revoking the car, the phone, and all support if I insisted on going to New York. I looked at Grandma, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I told them I did not need their conditional support. I had a full scholarship, I had Grandma in my corner, and, most importantly, I had myself. I stood up, reminding her of the brave girls in the stories she used to tell me. Perhaps it was finally time I fought my own dragons. As she left, she paused at the door, her voice barely audible when she said the dragons always won in. Her stories. "No," I corrected her. "You just stopped writing before the ending." After she left, Grandma and I sat in a heavy, contemplative silence. Outside, Lindsay's car remained parked for several minutes, the taillights glowing in the driveway like a dying ember before she finally pulled away. Grandma remarked that it was a breakthrough, though I wasn't sure if she meant for me, for Lindsay, or for the entire fractured foundation of our family. I headed to the workshop, where the air was thick with sawdust and the weight of broken promises. I found my father in his usual spot, hunched over a cabinet he had been working on for months. He didn't look up, only mentioning that my mother was crying again. I knew Alyssa had called him, claiming the stress of my choices might cause her to lose the baby. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let it buckle my knees. I told him it wasn't fair, and for the first time, he turned to face me, his eyes looking tired and watery behind his safety glasses. He claimed none of this was fair, but that it was just family. I picked up a piece of wood shaving and let it fall, telling him that from where I stood, family looked like nothing but a series of sacrifices, and I was tired of being the only one doing the bleeding. He sat down, a rare shift in his behavior, and confessed that he had sacrificed his own architecture career to support Mom and raise us girls. I asked him how that was working out for him, hiding in this workshop while everything else fell apart. I moved to the workbench and placed my hand on the cabinet, bringing up the college essay I had written the year before. I told him I knew he had found it in the trash after Mom had reviewed it. His hand trembled. He insisted that Mom meant well, that she was just acting in the best interest of her version of our family, the same way she had guided Lindsay and Alyssa away from their artistic passions. I looked him in the eye and told him that he was just as responsible as she was. He had seen it all happening, but he had decided it was easier to build furniture than to stand up for his daughters. The workshop door swung open and Mom appeared, her face blotchy and red. She demanded that Dad talk some sense into me, accusing me of throwing away everything we had planned. I told her that she was the one who threw away my essay. She froze and Dad became intensely focused on his sandpaper. She claimed she was protecting me, but I told her she was only protecting her perfect narrative, her controlled world where every person had a script they were forced to follow. Dad's voice suddenly cracked through the air like a whip, surprising us both. He ordered us to sit down. As we formed a tense triangle on his work stools, I told them about the new letter I had received from the New York Academy, inviting me to feature my portfolio in their incoming student showcase. Mom tried to interrupt, but Dad stopped her. I told them my work showed promise and that I could have a real future. I showed them the email, wanting them to be proud, but knowing they would only see it as a threat. Mom started her usual defense about wanting what was best, but Dad cut her off, asking if it was best for me or for her idea of who I should be. He stood up, pacing the shop, and finally voiced the truth he had buried for years. He told her he had watched her reshape Lindsay's dreams until she forgot them, and he had remained silent when she convinced Alyssa that art was just a phase. He was done building cabinets while she dismantled our daughters. Mom's face went white, but Dad didn't stop. He picked up a small wooden box from his workbench that I had never seen before. Inside, he had kept my old sketches, my report cards, and my achievements, everything I thought had gone unnoticed. Mom stared at the box as if it were a bomb, and in a way, it was. I stood up and told them firmly that I was going to New York and I was finished feeling guilty about it. I left them there, Mom with her shattered certainty and Dad with his box of secret. Stifled pride. My phone buzzed in the driveway. It was a text from Alyssa. We need to talk. I arrived at her apartment, which looked like the intersection of an art studio and a baby store. She sat on her couch, paint-stained and swollen, holding a mug of tea. She didn't waste time, accusing me of killing our mother. I countered that Mom was killing us both. She told me the stress was jeopardizing her pregnancy, but I refused to let her make me the villain. She seemed bitter, a shadow of the free spirit she used to be. When I asked her about the art school she had once dreamed of, she flinched, claiming she had simply grown up and realized art was just a hobby. I picked up one of her recent paintings, noting that she still painted every day. She had a gallery showing coming up, the one Mom dismissed as a little hobby show while she praised Lindsay's corporate climb. I pushed her to admit that she was angry, not at me, but at herself for letting them clip her wings. She stood up, frantic, saying she needed stability for her baby. I told her she needed to be honest about who she was. The argument escalated until the tension felt like glass about to shatter. She finally admitted she had saved all my childhood drawings, confessing that I was the only one who had encouraged her and that now I was better than she ever was. Her voice cracked as she admitted she was stuck painting nursery murals while I went off to live the dream she had buried. I invited her to come with me to New York once the baby was born, but she recoiled, terrified of the idea of leaving the family or disappointing them. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. She told me that while I was right about the toxic dynamic, knowing it didn't change her fear. As I reached the door, she swallowed hard and asked me to paint something beautiful and free, not just for me, but for her too. Outside, the reality of my life caught up with me. 5 missed calls from Mom, 3 texts from Lindsay, and a message from Dad announcing a non-negotiable family meeting. I replied with a single word, no. Then I called Grandma, asking if she would accompany me to pack up my room the following day. Her reply was immediate, about damn time. The next day, they were waiting in the driveway like a firing squad. Mom, Dad, Lindsay, and Alyssa stood in a line. The house felt like a courtroom. Lindsay pulled out a folder, offering a compromise, community college, and an internship at her firm. I looked at her, then at the others. They wanted me trapped. Mom tried to push the opportunity, but I interrupted, pointing out that she was just forcing her path on me. Lindsay asked if I thought I was making my own choices, and I fired back, asking why I had found her old journals full of the stories she had abandoned. The tension in the driveway was suffocating, a silent battlefield where my future hung in the balance. Dad looked on, trapped between his habitual passivity and the wreckage of our family dynamic. Lindsay, ever the corporate warrior, clutched a manila envelope containing my college fund, the final lure of a gilded cage. She demanded I take it, insisting that family was about compromise and support. I rejected the money, pointing out that their support was merely a bribe to keep me compliant. When I confronted her about the stories she had abandoned and the drawings Dad had secretly kept, her polished mask finally shattered. She was terrified that I would succeed, because my success would prove that their sacrifices had been a choice, not a necessity. Grandma Edith stepped in, cutting through the drama with the force of an ultimatum. I displayed my own path, a full scholarship, and the independent savings Grandma had quietly nurtured for me since birth. Lindsay staggered as the realization hit that I had not just planned my escape, but had actually executed it. As I turned to leave, Dad finally stepped forward. He bypassed the empty arguments and handed me a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. Inside was my first crayon drawing, preserved from childhood. It was a silent acknowledgement of the person I had always been, buried beneath their expectations. I hugged him, nodded to my sisters, and climbed into Grandma's car. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. I looked toward the horizon. Months later, my first gallery showing in New York was in full swing. The centerpiece was a painting titled Family Portrait, 3 birds in a gilded cage, with one taking flight. Dad was there, standing before the canvas. We spoke with a newfound honesty. He told me he was teaching woodworking at the community center, finally building things that mattered rather than hiding behind his craft. He confessed that Mom was in therapy and that Lindsay had begun writing short stories again under a pen name. Even Alyssa had turned her nursery murals into a small exhibition. The room was vibrant, filled with classmates and admirers, but my attention caught on a final message from Alyssa. Her daughter had arrived, named Eden to symbolize freedom and new beginnings. Grandma Edith approached, smiling with immense pride, and handed me a literary magazine. Lindsay had published a story, a tangible sign that she was finally testing her own wings. I looked around the gallery, seeing the evidence of a slow, painful, yet beautiful transformation. My father stood studying my art with an understanding that hadn't been there before, and my sister was finally writing for herself. I realized then that my departure had not destroyed my family. It had forced them to confront their own mirrors. I had walked out of the cage, and in doing so, I had left the door wide open for them to follow. I was exactly where I needed to be, creating, thriving, and finally, undeniably free. Thanks for watching.